Good morning. Good morning. I'm going to try and get everybody's attention. If everybody could go ahead and grab a seat, that'd be great. We're going to go ahead and get started in just a second. So I'll give you a minute or so to get settled. I'm Dickie Mopper, and I'm the chair of the Savannah Development and Renewal Authority, and I want to thank each and every one of you for coming today. I think this is overwhelming. Our authority is thrilled to be starting the Urbanism series for Savannah and to host speakers from around the country to come in and speak to us about things that are being done in other parts of the world. You know, obviously, there's a lot that people can learn from Savannah, but there are things we can learn from outside of Savannah. So we're thrilled to have this opportunity and to have a group like this of real movers and shakers in Savannah, Georgia, who are concerned about its future is so exciting. So thank each of you for being here. But as always, events like this cannot take place without being underwritten. First, I'd like to thank Rex Benton with NAI, Mopper Benton, and Jessica Kelly with Mopper Kelly Realtors for being the sponsors of this event, the presenting sponsors. But even that wouldn't be enough. I also want to thank very much Brown Design Studios, Ben Carter Enterprises, The Pinion Company, Thomas and Hutton, Longleaf Partners and Brad Baugh, Symbiosity, Creative Approach, HOS Management, Advanced AV Rentals, APA of Georgia, and the Creative Coast for allowing us to use their parking lot today. So we do thank everybody for that. In addition, I want to recognize the board of the Savannah Development and Renewal Authority. So if any of our board members are here, if they would stand. Thank you very much. You know, I was looking online the other day just thinking in terms of, we all use the term suburban and urbanism and urban, but what do they mean? And just for fun, I pulled up a definition. I read about 10, but I like this one best. Throughout the centuries, urbanism has been about humans living in stimulating proximity. Urban towns draw people in as a place of interaction, opportunities, and creativity. Very, very simple. You know, I'll just tell you very quickly, lucky and blessed to have been born in Savannah. Born an urbanite, just happened, born in Savannah. Grew up in a neighborhood where I could walk to every school I went to. I could walk to the toy store. I could ride my bike to the playground. I didn't have to worry about cars or how to get anywhere. And then 47 years ago, before it was cool, I moved downtown. It was even better. In the block I lived in was my doctor, my lawyer, my dentist. On the corner was a great little neighborhood restaurant. You could do anything you wanted in Savannah. And Savannah's opportunities are unlimited now. And our growth and our future depends on being successful by planning, understanding zoning, and creative mobility. So this is a great day for us to listen to people and learn more about it. At this time, I'd like to ask Kevin Klinkenberg to come up. Kevin's going to take over the program, and we'll be talking about the day as well. We're broken into several segments. This morning's segment is going to be with the speakers. Then we'll break for lunch. This afternoon, we're going to have a panel discussion, question and answer, with Howard Morrison acting as our moderator. So I want to thank Howard as well. Kevin?
Good morning, everyone. One more time. Good morning, everyone. All right, thank you. We are in the South, after all, right? Before I get started, I have to say a couple things about Dickie Mopper. You know, I've come to know over the last year and a half working with Dickie as the chair and got to know him pretty well. And, I look at my calendar sometimes and I think that I'm a pretty busy guy. And then I talk to Dickie about all the things that he's doing and it just blows me away. I don't know where he finds the time to do all of the things that he does, but we have some remarkable individuals in this community who really give tremendously, not just financially, but of their time. And Dickie is one of those guys that I have really come to know, and I think we all actually owe him a round of applause for this event. I also would be remiss if I didn't thank two women who really were instrumental in pulling this event off. Catherine Williams, who was our program coordinator, and Amy Brock, who works with us on our communications. Catherine just popped in the door, and where's Amy? Please thank them. They both just do a terrific job and make me look good. So we all know that we couldn't do that without them. I want to tee up the schedule really quickly, and then I have a few announcements and other items to go through. As Dickie mentioned, we have a few segments here today. In the morning, we will have our two guest speakers. We will break for lunch when they're complete, right around noon. And then we will have a panel in the afternoon that Howard Morrison will be leading. I know that many of you know Howard and know him very well, and I think this is going to be really exciting. I know everybody can't stick around for the whole day, and some of you actually have to get back to work and make some money and do things. But if you have the opportunity to stick around for the panel, we are going to focus more on Savannah-specific issues and questions, and I think you'll find it very interesting if you have the time. So I can't help but, I feel like I have to tell a little story. Standing up here, I can't help but reflect a little bit. So 5.5 years ago, I did kind of a crazy thing. And I had fairly recently turned 40, so this wasn't, really a midlife crisis, although some of my friends considered it a midlife crisis. I actually preferred the term midlife celebration as opposed to midlife crisis. But I kind of packed everything in the car and moved to Savannah, Georgia, just on a whim. And I had been here several times, and like many of you who are not from here, felt very captivated by Savannah. And I thought, well, I think I'm going to rent a carriage house in Savannah and hang out for 6 to 12 months and just do as little as possible. And just enjoy a year without much and just kind of lay low under the radar. And a funny thing happened that I actually really fell in love with this town and decided to stick around. And it's funny now and thinking, 5.5 years later, there are 3 things in my life that at that point I thought, may never happen. One of which is actually having a day job, having a 9-to-5 job with a salary and payroll and all of that. That was unusual for me. I had actually been working for myself when I was 30 years old, and from then on. So having a paycheck and a responsibility to show up at 9 to 5 was new. Buying a house again, there was a pretty extended period of time where I thought I would never have a mortgage again or want to do that. I'm sure many of you have had that experience through the recession. But we did that, and then most recently, now 3 months ago, I have a daughter, and so that was, I hit a certain point in my life where I thought that may not happen, but all of those things have happened really, and it just kind of goes to show that you never really know what's around the corner, and it allows me, since I have the microphone and I get a chance to speak for a minute, it gives me a chance to really say thank you to all of you. I really appreciate how welcoming everybody has been in Savannah, and it's really my pleasure to be able to work in this capacity and serve this community and do what I do best, which is working in planning and development. And it's certainly been a life change for the last few years, but I couldn't be more excited about where we are today and where we're headed. So thank you all very much. Okay, thank you. Let's see if I can figure this out now. A few items of business, we do have a hashtag. So yes, for those of you who are into Twitter and Instagram and anything else and you like to use hashtags, please use this one that we have up on the screen, SAVURB. For those of you who are AIA or APA members, please be sure to sign one of the sheets that are out front, as you do get continuing education credits for this event, and I want to make sure that everybody takes advantage of that. I do want to say just a few words about Savannah Development and Renewal Authority and where we are and where we're headed. I won't take too much time on this because I am actually scheduled to speak March the 9th at the Savannah Downtown Business Association. So for any of you that are there, we will go into this in more detail and elaborate more on where we're headed. But we have done a lot of work as a board and as a team in the last year and a half to rebuild and rebrand this authority. And we are in a position now where we have a lot of very exciting things coming up in 2016 and beyond. We'll be using this tagline, plan, develop, and promote, as sort of to coordinate all of our various activities, and I'll get into that more as time goes on. But those are really the three areas that we work in as an authority. We do have a new website that is up at sdra.net, not .com, but .net, and we'll be adding substantially more content to that website over the next month or two. And we really hope that that can be a home for information about planning and development issues for greater downtown, and a home for discussion and conversation as well. We do have a couple of other events that I'll just announce right now, and if you have the opportunity to block these off on your calendar, it would be great. On April 1st, yes, on April Fool's Day, we will be partnering with ArtRise Savannah and the Starland, the Star Council and the Starland neighborhood area to do a Better Block event in partnership with the First Friday Art March that the ArtRise puts on. This will be on Bull Street in the Starland area, and this will be an example of a quarterly event that we hope to put on with Savannah Development and Renewal Authority in partnership with whoever the community partner is that would like to work with us. And I can't emphasize that enough. We are looking for partners to work with as we conclude and do our events and everything else. So please mark that down. And then we have tentatively scheduled September 29th for our next speaking event, where we'll have an outside speaker come into town. We'll get details of that out later on, but that will be our next big event. So before I get into the speakers, I also just want to say that I think it's really great that we are having this event in this location. Obviously, right outside the front door, you have a full example of everything that's going on in terms of planning and development in Savannah. And development is headed west from downtown. Obviously, the student housing that's under construction, but if you look west of Martin Luther King Boulevard, you will find just numerous projects that are either under construction, have been recently completed, or are anticipated. And the market is telling us that going west is critical for the future of this city. As we look ahead, I think it's important that we all dig in and figure out how to do this all right. We have a tremendous opportunity as a community to look at how this downtown grows west, north, and east, but especially west over the next 20 or 30 years. You know, in 17 years, Savannah will be 300 years old. And I think it's good to ask ourselves, what do we envision for that 300th birthday? Where do we see the next 100 years for Savannah beyond that? And we all often get caught up in the development of the moment and the project of the moment, and that's our nature. We have to do those things. A project comes along and we have to understand it and respond to it. But it's also important that we take the opportunity to look beyond and figure out what we can be over the next 20, 30, 50 years and more. We're situated right next to the I-16 exit ramp, which obviously has been the source of conversations for more than 20 years in Savannah about what to do about it, whether it should come out or not. And we really need to not just talk about these things, but figure out how we can all move forward together on these projects. So I would just encourage you to get involved, to please partner with us, with Savannah Development and Renewal Authority, and our partners with the City of Savannah, and dig in and help us all understand and work on this together. If we're going to be successful, we need all of you to participate, and we would really like your involvement in helping tackle these big issues. Through this authority, you all have an opportunity to volunteer your time if you would like. We obviously have a board, but we also have extensive committees and opportunities for you to get involved and really make a difference in your community. And so I would really encourage everybody to do that and participate and work with us. I'm extremely excited about what's coming down the road for the next few years, and I hope you all are as well. So with that, I am going to introduce our speakers. We have two fantastic speakers this morning. I will mention that they have called an audible already and switched up the program a little bit from what we printed, as you know, as these things tend to happen, and that's fine. So I want to introduce both of them now because we're going to start with Chuck. He'll talk for, I think, 20 or 30 minutes, and then Joe will come in and talk for about an hour, and then we'll have Chuck come back and wrap up with another 30 to 40 minutes or so. So we'll still have that same 2-hour time period, but it will be in a little different order than what we have on the agendas, just so you all are aware of that. I've gotten to know both of these gentlemen over the last few years and seen them speak a number of times, and I think you'll really enjoy them. They have certainly opened my mind to different ways of thinking about the issues that we face, and I think they're really both excellent. So I'll first introduce, what I'm going to do is I'll introduce Joe, since of course he's going second, and then I'll introduce Chuck, who's leading us off. So Joe Minicozzi is the principal of Urban 3, a consulting company created by Asheville real estate developer Public Interest Projects. Urban 3 analyzes the relationship between building design and tax generation across the United States and Canada. Urban 3 creates graphics for what many struggle to describe with words, supporting the notion that seeing is believing. Joe is a sought-after lecturer on city planning issues, and his work has been featured in numerous journals and at international conferences. He's a founding member of the Western North Carolina-based not-for-profit Asheville Design Center. Joe holds a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Miami and a Master of Architecture and Urban Design from Harvard University. For fun, Joe collaborates with another Joe on a collection of notable Asheville buildings done as birdhouses. So you learn something new all the time. The other Joe is a 90-year-old Asheville native. Their collaboration is called Joe Squared. So something new every day. And then Charles Marohn, known as Chuck to his friends and colleagues, is a professional engineer licensed in the state of Minnesota and a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. Chuck is the founder and president of Strong Towns. He has a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Minnesota's Institute of Technology and a master in urban and regional planning from the University of Minnesota's Humphrey Institute. He's the author of Thoughts on Building Strong Towns and a World-Class Transportation System, as well as the host of the Strong Towns podcast and a primary writer for Strong Towns web content. And I would just say, for those of you who are podcast listeners and people, as I am, I'm kind of an avid listener of podcasts. Sometimes you'll see me walking around Savannah with my headphones on, and I'm probably listening to a podcast when that's going on. Chuck's podcast, I think, is exceptional. And if you're interested in planning and development issues, I think it's really the best one out there. And if you get a chance to subscribe to it, you'll definitely enjoy it. Chuck has spoken in dozens of towns and cities across North America and speaks regularly for diverse audiences and venues. Chuck grew up on in a small farm in central Minnesota, the oldest of 3 sons of 2 elementary school teachers. He graduated from Brainerd High School in 1991. He joined the Minnesota National Guard on his 17th birthday during his junior year of high school and served for 9 years. Besides being passionate about building a stronger America, he loves playing music, is an obsessive reader, and religiously follows his favorite team, the Minnesota Twins. And as a former Kansas Cityan and a proud Kansas City Royals fan since I was about that tall. I like to give Chuck a hard time about the Twins. Chuck and his wife live with their 2 daughters and 2 Samoys just north of Baxter, Minnesota, and you can learn more about the work of Strong Towns at strongtowns.org. So at this point, I'd like to welcome Chuck Marohn to Savannah.
Yeah, things have worked out better for Kevin on the baseball front the last couple years. Thank you so much. Back in the mid-2000s, I was running my own planning company after working as an engineer for a number of years and then going back to graduate school and starting my own planning firm. And I kept running into situations that didn't make any sense to me, projects that I was working on. And I became kind of very frustrated because as I would bring things up, having this engineering background and this planning background, these are two very, to the outsider, look like very similar disciplines. But when you go through these programs and work in these fields, they're very, very different. Seeing things that, didn't make much sense, but I was unable to kind of communicate to people. At one point, I went to one of our cities and showed them, like, look, you have a 100-year supply of already developed platted properties with sewer and water and roads. Why are we doing any more of these? And the answer was, shut up and sign the permit. That's not your job to think about these things. Someone else has got this figured out. So when we got to 2008, I started to write. I started to write about the things that I saw and the things that I was seeing. And I was trying to answer one central question for myself. Why, despite all the growth and the jobs and the job programs and the incentives and everything that we were doing to stimulate growth, why are our cities broke? Why do our cities lack the money to just do basic things? Why can't we keep that crosswalk painted? Why can't we keep the street lights on? Why can't we fix the potholes? Why do we come up with the money to do these massive things, but we can't do the basics? Why are cities everywhere struggling? So what we're going to do today is I'm going to lead off with the answer to that question. It will depress you to a degree. Joe is then going to follow with some of the most illuminating work that I've ever seen that will really help you kind of see your city differently. And then I am going to come up and talk about transportation, because a lot of this is shaped by our transportation decisions and choices. I'm using Joe's pointer, so I started off by hitting the wrong button. Okay, Joe. Dude, I don't like your pointer already.
There's a little forward arrow right here.
Yeah, that's what I was hitting, and it was going back.
Okay. So he's got us off.
Yeah. Are we good now? Okay. Yep, there we go. All right. I want you to start by thinking about the way cities were built thousands of years ago. If we think about the way that we built cities a long, long time, these are two artists' renderings. The one on the left is an ancient city called Fertile Crescent, like 6,000 BC. The one on the right, of course, is ancient Rome. If we think about the way these cities were built, they were built around the dominant transportation technology of the day, that, of course, being your 2 feet. People walked everywhere, so the distance between different types of things you would do on a normal day, the scale of the place, the spacing, all this was based around a civilization of people who walked. Fast forward to, this is my hometown. I live 2 hours roughly north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. This is what it looked like back in the early 1900s. We are not going to have our 300-year anniversary anytime soon. It's really amazing to me to think about you guys being at that point in your development pattern. But this is what my hometown looked like back in the early 1900s. People would arrive by stagecoach, they'd arrive by train, but once they got there, they would walk to everything that they did. So the spacing, the layout, the distance between different types of things you would do on a normal day, all of this was scaled to a society of people who walked. Fast forward 50 years, we began to build around a different transportation technology, of course. We began to build around the automobile. We came up with different building types, different building styles, different ways of arranging things on the landscape. If we were to ask the average American today to explain this transition, they're likely to talk about it in terms of progress. We were people who used to walk everywhere, so we built cities around people who walked. Now we are people who drive everywhere, so we build cities around people who drive. Someday we will have jet cars, and we will build cities around people with jet cars. And someday we will teleport, and we'll build cities in a completely different way, right? This is a narrative of progress, things always getting better. That's a very comforting way to look at this situation. I want to give you another way to look at this that isn't quite as comforting. It's going to create kind of a backdrop for our conversation today. When we look at these civilizations and we ponder them, we have to acknowledge that by the time you get to even ancient Ur, people had been experimenting with how to build cities for thousands of years. And by experimenting, I mean they would try things. What worked, they would copy and expand upon. What didn't work, they would throw away, because those places would die, right? They would go away. They did not exist anymore. By the time you get to my hometown in the early 1900s, you have a style and a pattern of building that is universal worldwide. Different cultures, different continents, different latitudes, all built in a very similar way, a way that was developed by trial and error experimentation over long, long periods of time. When we look at this style of development, even though this seems very familiar to us, for many of us this is, what we know, right? This is how you build. It's important to understand that this has not been around for a long, long time, right? We didn't try this out in Florida for a couple hundred years, see what worked, what didn't work, and then export the best ideas here. What did we do? We decided this was the right thing to do, and we transformed an entire continent within a generation on these new ideas. They didn't come from trial and error. They came from universities and European intellectuals and think tanks. It is important for us to understand that what seems very normal to us, like the way things have always been done, is actually a very huge experiment. Nobody has ever tried in a generation to transform an entire economic living arrangement of a continent, but that's what we did. And now we're dealing with some of the financial ramifications. I want to talk about those now. When we look 100 years ago, 200 years ago, the founding of Savannah, if we were going to experience jobs and growth and economic development, those things would be byproducts of things we did here. Today our economy is different, and today we have different ways of creating growth and jobs and economic development at the local level. The first is transfer payments between governments. The idea that the state government, the federal government, as our partner in creating jobs and growth, do things like give out grants and loans and tax subsidies in order to generate growth and jobs at the local level. The second is transportation spending. The idea that we collectively pool our dollars, we use them to make large transportation improvements, whether it's highway widening or transit improvements or interchanges or frontage roads. These create jobs while they're being built, and then afterwards are a platform where we can, at the local level, experience more growth. The third mechanism is debt. Public debt is an important part of this conversation, but even more important is private debt. The ability of individuals and corporations to get long-term loans, very low down payments, very low interest rates, have those products sold off onto a secondary market, securitized, bought up by different groups around the world. This creates an enormous amount of liquidity. When we look at these mechanisms, they create growth, and for us at the local level, the growth is good because it gives us increased tax revenue. It gives us the money that we need to do the things we want to do. This is kind of city administration 101, right? You get growth and you become more successful. It's important to understand the powerful incentives in the system that we operate in. When we get new growth through one of these mechanisms, when the federal government comes in with a grant, when the state government comes in with a program, when the DOT comes in with a transportation investment, or when the private sector is able to leverage a lot of debt, we as local taxpayers pay a very small portion of those transactions. We may have a little staff time, we may have to pay to upsize a pipe here or there, but generally the millions of dollars being transacted comes from someone else. The benefit that we get, however, as a local government, as local communities, is substantial. We didn't pay very much, but now we get all this growth, we get all the fee revenue, we get all the new tax revenue. The catch is that we agree as part of these transactions that we will service and maintain this stuff forever. We will fix all the roads and the streets and the pipes and the pumps and the valves. We'll provide police protection, fire protection, and all the services that are needed, not just today, but forever. We are, in a sense, exchanging a near-term benefit in cash for a long-term liability. There's only one of two ways that approach makes any sense. Either growth is going to continue at ever-accelerating rates. In other words, we're always going to be able to generate a whole bunch more new growth, and that new growth will create a bunch of new money that we can use to make good on all the promises we made a generation ago. Or the pattern of development, the way we actually go about laying out and constructing our places, is going to create for us more wealth than it does cost. Everybody in this room knows that this first assumption's not true, right? It's not mathematically possible, but even if it were, we've experienced enough of this in our economy to know we're not going to grow at accelerating rates forever. Unfortunately, the second assumption is also not true. And for a few slides here, I'm going to get a little bit technical on you. I am an engineer, so I've got to do some of this. One of the things that we did early on at Strong Towns was we started to look critically at the components of our development pattern that we can measure. Engineers, planners, economic development advisors have this thing that we've come to call the quantum theory of economic development. The quantum theory of economic development goes something like this. You can't really measure the success of this project. You can't really measure the success of this project. You can't really measure the success of this project because they all work together. So even if this project loses money, and this project loses money, and this project loses money, and this project loses money, you have to trust that as a whole they come together and they make something, grand and wonderful. This is the quantum theory of economic development. We kind of rejected that and said, no, there are parts of the system we can measure. This is a prime example. This is a dead-end cul-de-sac. There's no through traffic here, no commercial traffic. The only reason this road exists is to serve the people that are on it. If these homes along this road were not there, it would not exist. This was built in the mid-1990s. The city had a policy then, if you pave the road, we'll pay half. So the city went out and paved the road. They paid half the cost. The property owners paid the other half. We asked the question, all right, based on the taxes the city's collecting from the people who live on this road, the only people who use this road in any substantive way, the only reason this road exists, how long is it going to take the city to recoup the half they just spent to build the road? The answer is 37 years. Now, the road's not going to last 37 years, but it's going to take the city that long just to break even. Of course, when the road has to be fixed, that's 100% the city's cost. And the taxpayers out here aren't paying anything near what it would take to actually meet that cost. This is another residential development. These are, again, a closed loop system with a dead end cul-de-sac. You've got no through traffic, no commercial traffic, just some residential properties. That's the only reason this road exists. This was built in the early 1980s. The road had completely fallen apart. The city went out to fix it. The cost was $354,000. We asked the question, okay, based on the revenue the city's collecting from these property owners here, how long is it going to take the city to recoup what they just had to spend to fix that road? The answer is 79 years. We then said, okay, let's say the city, between now and the time the road fell apart, wanted to collect enough money from these property owners to actually fix their road. What would that mean? It would mean an immediate 46% increase in taxes and annual increases of 3% over inflation every year for the next 25 years, with all that money going just to maintain the roadway. The sewer, the water, vastly more expensive systems. Sometimes people say, okay, Chuck, I get it. We know we lose money on residential property. We make it up on commercial property. Commercial is our cash cow. My initial response to that is always, I don't know any corporation that loses money on 90% of what it does and tries to make it up on the last 10%. I'm not sure why an incorporated municipality would find that to be a wise strategy. Nonetheless, we've kind of convinced ourselves that if we just have enough commercial going on, it doesn't matter what happens in other places. This is a business park. This is one of those build it and they will come investments that cities like to do. It's got the wide industrial streets. All the lots have full utilities. This was built in the mid-1990s. Every single lot is now built upon. The city felt this was so successful, they wanted to repeat it, just build the exact same thing right next door. We said, if we could build the same thing and get the same investment, would that be a good project? In today's dollars, it would cost $2.1 million to build this. There's $6.6 million of investment out there. Now pause for a second. Of the investment that's been made in this existing business park, 4 of the lots are a church. 2 of the lots belong to the school district. It's their bus maintenance facility. 1 of the lots is a county maintenance garage. 1 of the lots is a city maintenance garage. These are all important properties, right? We need churches, we need schools, but none of them pay any taxes to the city. Of the remaining properties, the ones that theoretically would be taxpayers, every single one of them was given a long-term tax subsidy in order to attract them to move into the park. For the sake of our analysis, we said, let's assume that every lot is built on within 1 year of this new park being created. Let's assume that none of them get tax subsidies, and every single one of them is a full taxpayer. If that were the case, it would still take the city, using 100% of the revenue collected, 29 years just to break even. That's 29 years where everyone else's taxes would have to go up to mow the ditches, sweep the streets, provide police protection, fire protection, and every other service that would be needed. And that's in the most wildly optimistic scenario. Now, I used to go through in my early presentations, because I was really proud of these, and I do about 15 of these, and people would just start crying after a while. I found that I can make the point with just 3 now, but if you're someone who would like more of these case studies, we've got a bunch of them on our website, and we'll give you that address at the end. Let me show you from a cash flow standpoint what's going on. And again, I apologize for being an engineer. I like charts. There's a couple charts in this presentation. I will walk you through them. It will not be painful. Let's say a developer comes to our community and says, I have a piece of property out here that I'd like to build upon. I will, at my expense, build all the commercial buildings, all the residential buildings. I will follow all of your rules and regulations. I'm not asking for any subsidies from you. I will, at my expense, put in the roads and the streets and the curb and the sidewalks and the pipes and the pumps and the valves. I'll pay for all of it. The only thing that I'm asking is that when I'm done building this new development, that you, the city, you, the taxpayer, agree to take it over and maintain it. What would we say? We say, fantastic, right? You mean you want no subsidies? You're going to follow all of our rules? You're going to build everything the way we've asked? I was at a council meeting once, and a council member said, you mean we get a free road? Yeah, you get a free road. Free road. Let's say, we're smart people. We want to be prudent. We've heard of this strong town stuff. We're going to try to do the right thing. So when the money from this new development comes in, what we're going to do is we're going to take the portion that would normally come out and get spent in other parts of the community fixing things. We're just going to take that and we're going to set it aside. And every year when that money comes in, we'll take that portion, we'll set it aside, and we'll allow it to accumulate so that when we get out a generation and we have to make good on that promise we made when we did the development, that we'll take care of it and maintain it, we've got a pot of money to do that. This is what that looks like. In year 1, everything's brand new. Money comes in, you take that portion, you set it aside. In year 2, you add to what you had in year 1. In year 3, you add a little more. Year 4, you add a little more. And you can see a 5-year-old road isn't costing you anything. A 10-year-old pipe isn't costing you anything. A 15-year-old sidewalk is not costing you anything. So as you go out in time, you're just making money. You're just bringing money in and adding to what you've got. And you get out a couple of decades and you've got quite a pile of cash sitting there. You're feeling very, very wealthy. The problem is, when you ultimately have to go out and fix it, what you find is that the cumulative amount of revenue you brought in is insufficient. And from a cash flow standpoint, you run far into the negative. Now, cities are not one development, right? Cities are a collection of development, a series of neighborhoods. So let's say our developer comes back in a couple years later, says, you know, that worked out really well for me, it worked out really well for you, I would like to do a similar size development. And every other year from this point on, a developer comes in the door with a similar size development. In other words, the ideal scenario, nice, steady, continuous growth. And we take that money and we set it aside and we save it for the day when we have to make good on our promises. Here's what that looks like. In year one, you've got your first development. It pays in for the entire 25 years shown. In year three, you add a second. In year five, in year seven. And you can see that not only are you having growth, but you're having growth upon growth upon growth. Your cash actually starts to accelerate upwards. You're feeling incredibly wealthy. And when you get to year 25, and you have to make good on that very first promise you made a generation ago, yes, you've got to spend a little bit of money, but it's not a big deal, right? You've had all this growth. The growth creates what we call the illusion of wealth. Because as we all intuitively understand, if you lose money on every transaction, you don't make it up in volume. If you lose money on every project you do, the further you go out in the time horizon, the more downward pressure there is on your budget. This is the answer to that question. Why are cities struggling? Why are cities all over the country struggling? Why can't we do basic things? This is the answer to that question. We are now way out here, right? We're way out on the edge of that development pattern. Do you recognize yourself here? This is the way humans are wired, right? This is the way we operate. This is why people smoke, right? You smoke and then, oh, I've got emphysema. This is why you have that extra bowl of ice cream and sit and watch the game instead of going for a walk, right? Like you enjoy the ice cream today and then heart disease, right? We are wired as humans to value pleasure and positive today and to deeply discount pain in the future, particularly when it is decades out into the future. Let me ask you a really critical question. When we think back to ancient Rome and ancient Ur, or when we think back to the early days of Savannah, what happened to cities that developed with this kind of an economic system? They went away, right? They weren't around to copy. They didn't become part of the DNA, the cultural DNA of how we build cities, because they weren't around to be copied. This gets back to that experiment. We are in a massive experiment. We have allowed human nature, which is our natural tendency, and our extreme affluence to have us do some crazy, insane things. Insane things that people a long time ago figured out we weren't supposed to do. We are in a very, very precarious and strange place. Obviously, there's some huge implications here, right? The mechanisms of growth we become accustomed to are waning. Where's the government running to rescue Detroit or Stockton or San Bernardino, right? It's not happening. Why? Because they don't have the money either. They don't have the money either. Where the DOTs across this country, and you guys just did a remarkable thing here in Georgia. You looked at the huge deficit you had in transportation spending. Your DOT comes out and says, we need all this money to do all this stuff. And you said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. We'll fund a little bit of it and call it good, right? No one ever asked, like, why do we have this huge, why are we building more lane miles than we have the ability to maintain, right? DOTs across the country are functionally insolvent, including yours, even though you may have a pile of cash sitting there today. If you actually lined up all the liabilities that you have, all the roads you promised to fix, that you someday will have to, there's no way you have the money coming in to do it. What this means is that for us, no one's coming to our rescue, right? At the local government level, we are going to be forced to absorb the costs of our development pattern. If we want that road fixed, we have to pay for it. If we want that pipe repaired, that money has to come from us. This can't be done in the current pattern of development without some incredibly large tax increases and or some devastatingly large cuts in services. Now, I wasn't invited here to tell you what you already know, right? This is the debate we're having at every level of government everywhere. What is the tax increase going to be? Who's going to pay for it? What is the service cut going to be? And where is that going to be felt? It is critical, sitting here today, that we see the third variable in this sentence, the current pattern of development. As long as we continue to build in a way that is functionally insolvent, there is no way that our cities are going to avoid insolvency. As long as we continue to build in an approach that gives us an illusion of wealth today in exchange for enormous long-term liabilities, there's no way that our cities are going to avoid default. Whether that is a hard default, like we see in places like Detroit and Stockton and San Bernardino, or whether it's a soft default, like we see in thousands of cities across this country, where they're putting off critical maintenance, they're laying off public safety employees, they're closing parks and libraries because they just don't have the money. We have to start having a conversation about how we build places that are financially productive. The way we're going to do that is my buddy Joe. So if you want to switch us out, Joe, come on up. Joe is going to actually start to kind of show you some of the ways that we can start to look at our development pattern that illuminates, I think particularly in a place here like Savannah that is incredible, illuminates a lot of optimism about not only how we can build and grow in a way that is financially productive, but how we actually have the assets at our hands right now to do it. So, Joe Minicozzi, everyone.
Thanks, Chuck. It's always a very upbeat story to follow. It's a little challenging, but I'll try. So thank you for having me here. This is a pleasure to be on this stage. It's a pleasure to be in this town as an urban designer, to visit Savannah. Anytime to come to Savannah, it's awesome. Chuck and I have a very similar process and way of looking at things. I use different metaphors, obviously. I see cities as places in time the same way Chuck does. I also see them the same way I look at people, that this town has a DNA that's been programmed into it, and it will grow in time into the future. You're 300 years old. Where do you see yourself in the future? So I kind of look at myself. This is how I started when I had hair and I was 3 months old, and I'm going to be this guy, right? So I'll be Papa whether I like it or not. So you all do this. You look at your family members, or more importantly, I look at this guy here. So I have 2 genetic issues in my family. I'm genetically Italian. You can see that from my name. We like to eat a lot. And we have a genetic predisposition to heart disease. So every Minicozzi male in my family has had a heart issue. So I have that in me, right? I have to do something about it. I have to exercise. I have to eat right. I have to eat salad, that kind of stuff. So what are you doing in your trajectory? As Chuck's pointed out, what's your path in this experiment that you're in for your city? Who is the model of Savannah? Where are you going to be when you grow up? And just keep those questions in your mind. Who else seen me present before? Anyone? Y'all can't shut out the answers back there. But so the other thing is, a lot of this information is hiding in plain sight, and it's amazing that we just don't see it. So I'm just going to ask you a really quick question. This is a kid's puzzle. I know it's early in the morning. Just tell me how many shapes you see in this kid's puzzle. I'm going to give you 5 seconds. Ready, go. You can just shout it out. Tell me how many shapes. Got 6, 16, 40. Somebody say 40? Okay. 10. Anybody want to go higher than 40? How many kids were on the bus? Anyone? What time was it on the clock? So Daniel Kahneman, who's a behavioral psychologist who wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, says that we have two modes of thinking in our brains. We have a fast mode and a slow mode. What I did is I just put you in a fast mode. Think about being a hunter-gatherer out in the savannah. You're looking, I guess a different savannah. You're looking for food, right? You're looking for an antelope and you're looking for tigers. So we can program ourselves to eliminate all the information by the question we're after. As we talk about our cities, oftentimes we don't even look at all the information that's there. We're having a council decision. We're going to debate something for 15 minutes and let's move it down the agenda. But are we capturing all the information? So I want to put in your mind the question of what a city is and talk about how cities are how they function financially. This is Asheville. I'm sure everybody's been to Asheville apparently? Okay, cool. Asheville is y'all know it's up in the mountains, beautiful scenery, beautiful mountains, bluegrass music, beer. We've got 20 breweries. It's kind of crazy. There's probably like 3 breweries going on right now that we don't know about. And like any quirky little mountain town, we have men dressed as nuns on tall bikes that eat fire. Typical little place, right? Well, it didn't start this way. This is how it started. And y'all probably have stood on this spot. 15 years after this picture was taken, this is what it became. We like to say the 3 T's made Asheville: trains, tourism, and tuberculosis. That when the train lines came, it brought a flood of tourists. Y'all had been coming up for generations to escape the heat in the summer times. Second streetcar line in the entire country. Richmond was the only one that was ahead of us. Presidents came to visit, presidents still visit. During the 1920s, we grew at 20% in population every single year of the decade, which is ridiculous growth. We were the 2nd largest city in North Carolina. Did y'all know that? The only city that was bigger than Asheville was Winston-Salem. We were bigger than Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham. In that process, we achieved the highest debt per capita of the entire United States. We were number 1 in debt. And when the Depression hit and our books were audited, we thought we had $5 million in the bank. It turned out we had $18,000 in the bank, a little clerical error there. Our entire city council was indicted and the mayor committed suicide. Some people call that leadership. But, Thomas Wolfe, famous American author, had this to say about his hometown, and he wrote this in a book. Asheville has squandered fabulous sums. They flung away the earnings of a lifetime. They have ruined a city. And in doing so, they've ruined themselves, their children, and their children's children. How would y'all like that if one of your hometown boys said that about your town? Right? Incidentally, he was threatened. His family was threatened. He was told never to come back to Asheville. His second book was called You Can't Go Home Again, for obvious reasons. But in a way, he was prescient. He was right. He kind of nailed it. It would take us generations to kind of deal with this debt. This is the newspaper from the Asheville Citizen-Times from 1976. And what's crazy about this is you would think that this debt that we carried for 40 years, I mean, they celebrated it. They burned the last bond. Get some guys to burn the bond. We got Miss Asheville's wearing her tiara. We teleprompter in Billy Graham. That's a big deal when Billy Graham shows up. But it's not even the headline story. The headline story is somebody dying in a prison fire in some other county. We couldn't even celebrate this. It would damage our children's children for generations. This is stuff we're still dealing with in Asheville. When we got out of that debt, we started doing what other people did. We cut a highway through the north side of downtown, which became the Crosstown Expressway, or I-240. Y'all have driven on it. The coup de grace was when we blew the mountain open. And I love that it's on a postcard. Isn't this awesome? We call this the Bowcatcher Cut. On the other side of the cut, the mall happened, and our downtown died. Familiar story? These are shots of Asheville from not too long ago. That's a 1996 Chevy Celebrity sitting right there in the front of that picture. Wouldn't y'all love to come up to Asheville and do a little elbow grease? This could be yours for the modest sum of a $1.4 million investment. Wouldn't you love to do that? I mean, look at these shots of downtown Asheville. You could blow a cannon off and not hit anybody. Boarded up buildings, flat on our face, too poor to fix them, too poor to tear them down. This is the story of Asheville from not too long ago. Like a Greek choir, anytime somebody tried to fix downtown, those children's children would rise up. We're not urban. We're not Charleston. We're not Boston. We're mountain people. We're rural. We're not a city. Right? That's not who we are. Our company was founded by this guy in the upper left. He was one of the people that resisted against that. His name is Julian Price. He passed away in 2001. He started a for-profit real estate development company with his basically inheritance. 75% of his money we used for sticks and bricks. We fixed the buildings, and we reserved 25% to seed entrepreneurs. So the first vegetarian restaurant, we put money behind them because the bank said it would never work. So this is one of our buildings before and after. Bank said this would never work. These are 400 to 600 square foot apartments. Show of hands, who would live in a 400 to 600 square foot apartment? Well, that's a lot of people for this audience. Usually I get about 10%, but that's about 20. Let me change the question. Who has lived in a 400 to 600 square foot apartment? That was our marketing survey. It's like, surely there's 26 units. There's got to be 26 people that are new to town, recently divorced, want to downsize, whatever. This has been, in developer world, this is called a home run. It's been 99% leased up ever since. The other thing about Julian is constantly educating the community. This is what the Grove Arcade looked like back then. It was just bricked in. And he had his newspaper, and I love this quote that he uses from Arthur Frommer. Among cities with no particular recreation appeal, those that have preserved their past continue to enjoy tourism. Those that haven't receive almost no tourism at all. Tourism simply doesn't go to a city that's lost its soul. 15 years later, Frommer's magazine would list us as the number 5 place in the country to visit. Last year we got listed number 1. We're a town of 90,000 people. We've got 9 million tourists a year coming through my town. It's crazy. All right, that's great, Joe. We're looking at this from a real estate development perspective and trying to advocate for what's going on in our town and try to explain to people the value of our downtown. For those of you that don't know Asheville, or that maybe know it a little bit, we're at war with our county. One of our state legislators called us a cesspool of sin. I was on the downtown board, and we're all like, well, did he really mean that? Maybe let's send a reporter up there and have a word with Senator Forrester. His second quote in the newspaper was, well, I didn't mean all the good people of Buncombe County. There's some good people in Buncombe County. It's just that city, actually that downtown part, that's where the freaks and weirdos are. So we threw a cesspool party. We've got t-shirts that say, welcome to the cesspool. I mean, what can you do? But the city, I'm a county resident, right? Last time I checked, I think everybody in our city is a county resident. So why are you hating on me? So part of this is explaining that story. It also explaining the economic effect of things. So what we have here, this is the value of our central business district at the far left of the slide. Our downtown was worth $100 million as a portfolio. Our parent company, Public Interest Projects, has a $15 million portfolio sitting inside that, right? So we as a community have a sharehold of $100 million sitting in our community for our value of our downtown. Just by fixing up those buildings that were there, we have grown our wealth to $400 million, or $500 million. Did y'all get that? Just by fixing this, all that stuff was there. We didn't add a new building until 2008. Now to show you all the love and joy in Asheville, this is how the community was treated, and I don't know if you can see this. This is one of my favorite citizens. His name is Chris Peterson. Chris is awesome. These are his campaign ads from the 90s, and this poor taxpayer is shackled to past council decisions. About $26 million of investment to fix downtown, to fix streets, to kind of get downtown going, and do a couple parking garages. Yielded $400 million worth of private investment. So let me ask you a question. Is it good to invest 26 and get back 400? Yeah. That's called a good ROI, right? Why do we still listen to Chris? Now, Chris has actually upped his game. He's got these full color pictures with like lightning bolts coming out of the mayor's eyes and like storm clouds. It's fire and brimstone. It's kind of awesome. But this is, every community has got somebody like this that just won't look at the data, won't see the facts. And so we're putting that out there to talk with our community. And I'm just going to go ahead and grab this from Oxford American Dictionary. Look at the word incorporate. It means to constitute a company, a city, or other organization as a legal corporation. So y'all are shareholders in a corporation. My city is a finite boundary of land that has to be managed. We only have acres of so much that we all sharehold together. My city is worth $12.8 billion. What are y'all worth? Do you know that? My city is 4 times the Donald in wealth. Now, I've been using this slide for 2 years. I think I'm going to have to hang it up because he's getting too much traction. But, this guy can run around talking about his wealth. Why can't my city? My city's worth more than he is. So if we look at land as a product, if we look at those buildings as a product and understand them, this is one of our buildings. This is what Chris complained about, the streetscape project. The city put a garbage can, a bike rack, 2 benches, and a street tree in front of our property. Thank you, city. Thanks for that subsidy. Even though the entire world can walk on it, it's ours. We took the building from $300,000 of value to $11 million of value. That represents a 3,500% increase in taxes in one parcel of land that was sitting there. Do y'all have a 401k plan that grows by 3,500%? Anyone? I mean, would you take that investment? So this is the growth that we're showing in our downtown by urbanizing and rehabiting it. So people say to me, like, well, Joe, that's not fair. We've got this Walmart over here at $20 million. That's double the value of your building. Okay, fair enough. This is my house. Those are my dogs. My dogs think they're lions. They're a little weird. We pay $2,000 in taxes. They're very strange dogs. We do that to freak our neighbors out. But we pay $2,000 in taxes. We're on 1/10 of an acre. Y'all follow me? So if a 1 acre cookie cutter hit my neighborhood, it'd grab 10 houses, or collection of $20,000 an acre of taxes. Walmart pays $220,000 in taxes, which is a handsome sum. But they're sitting on 34 acres. So when you actually break their acreage down, it's $6,500 an acre. What kind of cash flow do you want to have? If you had our building downtown, an acre of that's $634,000. So 2 weeks ago, I was in Colorado presenting this, and I was like, well, let me make it simple for y'all in Colorado. If you had an acre of land to grow something, what are you going to grow? You know, and they got the joke. This works in Asheville too, by the way. But anyway, so you get that. You go to the cash crop, right? And people say, well, Joe, we take that loss because we're going after the retail. Okay, fair enough. Let's get rid of me. My neighborhood doesn't sell anything that I know of. And we'll run the retail numbers. Now, the misnomer is the city gets a portion of the retail tax collected. In my town, back when I ran the numbers, the states can actually tweak that. We get a lot less now. We're down to about 9%. But let's go ahead and keep it at 27%. Of the 8 cents on the sales, which is about $47,000, or a total tax take of $51,000 an acre in taxes, retail plus property. That's just our property tax per acre up there. Let's be fair and add our retail taxes, because we've got ground floor retail. We actually have some retail in the basement too. That's another $414,000. Which number's bigger? Jobs? You want to talk about jobs? Let's talk about jobs. Did y'all get this? I mean, it's just numbers, right? When you stack it up side by side, we also have 90 units an acre of residential in that building too. You just get more stuff in less space. These are the lessons that Chuck talked about. We've learned for thousands of years. It's economically potent. It makes sense, right? So that's just the city side. As I told you, the city sits inside a county, so to my brothers and sisters out in the county, let's take a look at your numbers too. So you see on the right, that's the average county tax per acre by the average resident of Asheville versus the average for my brothers and sisters out in the county in the unincorporated area. So you see that the city resident is actually producing more county taxes than people out in the county. When I pick up the phone, the sheriff doesn't show up. So how about sending me a thank you card instead of hating on me? Y'all get that? Now, we also like to pick on the Biltmore estate. America's largest house needs the biggest tax break, but we'll just put that aside for a second. So here's the mall at $8,000 an acre. Now you see why an elected official would choose commercial over residential. It's an incredible bump. You're at $8,000 an acre for commercial in red versus residential in blue at about $2,000, let's say. But let's not stop there. Let's bring downtown into it. Now here's our building at the far right at $250,000 an acre of county taxes versus the mall at the center of the chart at $8,000. So what we find is what's good for the downtown is great for the city, but it's unbelievable for the county. When's the last time my county stepped in and funded a sidewalk project or helped with a dog park? You know? And that's part of the conversation that we have to have collectively. In Asheville, we've started that. The city and the county need to be together on this because it begets wealth for everybody. And let's talk about this financially. I just want you to realize that this really isn't scary math that I'm doing here. I'm doing 5th grade division, right? Dividing value in acres. That's it. So we do this, right? When we talk about productivity, we don't talk about the productivity of cars as the miles per tank, do we? If we did, we'd all be driving Ford F-150s at 650 miles per tank. You'd find this laughable and you'd make fun of me. You're like, Joe, come on now. All tanks are different sizes. It's the gasoline, it's the gallon of gas that propels the car. We buy it by the gallon. That's how we measure everything. It's the miles per gallon, not miles per tank. And when you say miles per gallon, the numbers change. I didn't change the vehicles. And we should all be driving BMW Asettas at 70 miles per gallon. Sorry to your Prius owners. Do y'all get this? I mean, this is basically simple productivity of understanding your resource. Land is your resource. You have a finite amount of it, and last time I checked, I don't think you can get an acre of land for less than $3. So if we're doing this for a $3 commodity, shouldn't we be doing it for a $30,000 and $40,000 commodity? Understand the productivity of your community. So we've done this all across the country, mashing up the data. It's quite simple. For every dollar of county taxes somebody out in the county is paying to the county per acre, a city resident is producing about $5 to that same county. The Walmart's about $7, the mall's about $9. As soon as you get to a two-story building, look what happens. It jumps up. And it's not that it jumps up proportionally from 2 to 3, it jumps up exponentially as you add more density. That value is there. This is how you build cities. Do y'all get this? So this real kind of a simple way of looking at it. And these are the relentless rules of humble arithmetic. If you do the math on this stuff, it will show you a new reality of your community. So we've kind of stepped up our game. We use GIS technology to kind of move the city out of the way and do things. This might be a little washed out, but the infrastructure, buildings are built on the infrastructure, and then you have the ologies. You have hydrology and geology. That's your typical GIS template of layers. What we specialize in is splitting the gap between nature and the man-made, and I want to show you what your economic reality is, your economic geography, right? It's like an economic MRI in a way. This goes back, for the folks from SCAD that are in the landscape architecture program, this actually goes back to the 1960s with Ian McHarg's book, Design with Nature, where he talks about measuring with money. You know, can we see our economics? So here's Asheville, this is my county. In the upper right, you see a big gray splotch. That's a national park, so that's non-taxable. So we zero that out. Gray is worth nothing. It's a non-producing property. In the light color is low value, and then the purple or hot colors is high value. So you see the Biltmore estate is a big purple splotch, right? Super high value. Mr. Cecil's property is worth $100 million. Anybody in the room have a house that's worth $100 million? You know, so when Mr. Cecil shows up at a council meeting, he gets a lot of attention, rightly so. But he's also sitting on 8,000 acres. So if you have 8,000 acres of anything, it's going to be super high value. So he's got the biggest gas tank in the community. What's his productivity, though? So if we change the question from total value to value per acre, the map changes. Let me just show it to you in 3D. Could y'all tell me where downtown Asheville might possibly be? Anybody want to take a guess? So you can see this big purple spike coming out of it. The other lesson that we've seen in this is if you look over to the right of the map, you see Black Mountain, the little town of Black Mountain. You can even see its main street popping up in red. So if Asheville is Mama Bear, Black Mountain's Baby Bear. It's like this little version of Asheville. The productivity is there writ large in the map. Y'all see that? So Des Moines, we've done it in Des Moines. This is the 4-county Des Moines metro area. And again, no surprise where downtown Des Moines might possibly be. And you see this spread of sprawl going westward in Des Moines. Just zooming into Polk County, this is the city, looking in closer to the downtown. And you can just let the economics tell you what's going on and what you're doing right in your community. Just do more of it. How about some more red stuff? You don't have to be purple everywhere. 1/4 of all of the jobs of the entire metro area are in that little circle. So basically it's a quarter of the jobs, and it's taking up about 0.4% of the land area. When you split into it and just go into the downtown, and this is kind of hard to read with the slide, but the downtown takes up 16% of the land area, but it's producing 16% of the jobs, but it's taking up 0.08% of the land area. So if you measure on productivity, downtown is 4 times the productivity of the circle. Did y'all get that? So retail sales, this is kind of a surprise to us. We did the retail sales productivity, and what popped up was actually East Des Moines For those of you that aren't familiar with Des Moines, East Des Moines is kind of like the Brooklyn. It's the thing across the river. It's not even downtown. It's surrounded by mostly state buildings, but they've got this thing called Zombie Burger that's killing it. But anyways, it's like the data is there. Just run the model, see what's working. Incidentally, there's a thing called the Jordan Creek Mall, which is about $500 million of retail sales, but it's also 6 times the land area of the CBD. So its actual productivity bumps it down here at about $800,000 an acre versus the downtown at $3 million. The data's there, just ask the question. Make things apples to apples so you can compare things and understand your economic cash flow. So property and sales taxes combined, again, the information tells you what's going on. So, okay, Joe, this is great. I'm in Georgia, I get to use this one. This is one of my favorite studies. What if I could bring you the ghost of Christmas future? You know, Joe and Chuck, you know, you guys, you just don't get it. We want suburbia. This is who we are. We've changed. We all want to drive around. We want parking spaces everywhere. What if you just give people 100% suburbia? What would that look like? What if I could bring you the ghost of Christmas future? Well, we got it in Gwinnett County. Anybody, y'all know Gwinnett County? When we did the project in Gwinnett County, I was under strict orders to the community presentation. I was not allowed to use the words urban, city, town, or municipal in my presentation. And I asked why, and they said, well, we're rural people here in Gwinnett County. Those are offensive words to us. All right, so y'all know where Gwinnett County is, right? It's outside the Atlanta satellite belt of the highway. There it is. Lawrenceville is the county seat. I had no idea where Lawrenceville was, never heard of it. 35,000 people in a rural environment. We pulled their numbers, and I called up my client, and I was like, Kelly, y'all are 800,000 people. That's huge. And she goes, yeah, but honey, you need to understand, we're 460 square miles. We're a big county. Okay, fair enough. I'm just some dumb idiot up in a mountain. What do I know? You divide 800,000 by 460, what do you get? Well, you get 1,900 people per square mile. That's density, right? Y'all follow me? So 1,900 people per square mile is less dense than DeKalb. So yeah, Gwinnett County, you're less dense than Atlanta, we get it. But we had all this other data, so we would just put it out there. And I presented this to them. I said, look, y'all are 200 people denser than Mecklenburg, North Carolina. Y'all know what's in Mecklenburg, North Carolina? Yeah, Charlotte. I'm like, check that out. They got a football team. What do you guys got? And on top of that, we've got Nashville. You're 600 people denser than Nashville. They got a football team too. And here's Austin, Texas. You're about double the density of Austin. As a planner, my mind is blown. I'm like, how did you guys get denser than these places? And you didn't produce anything bigger than Lawrenceville at 35,000 people. This is Raleigh, this is Asheville. This is what 35,000 people looks like in a rural environment. This is Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So we did their map, and Josh McCarty in my office did this model, and I was like, Josh, this is blowing my mind. It's just this big yellow kind of thing. I said, turn it on its side, so he kind of turned the model, and it looks like a 1970s shag carpet. It's just like right across the whole thing, right? This is what we typically see. We've got Chapel Hill, Carborough, and Hillsborough. We've got the 3 municipalities inside the county, and you can see Main Street, Main Street, Main Street on each one of them, like Papa Bear, Mama Bear, Baby Bear. The physical form tells you what's going on, and on the right of the model, there's some new urbanism going on over here. So you can see the value productivity, like an economic MRI, you can see what's working. This is what you got here. And I said, these are your choices. This is what you chose. Your highest value per acre, the top of your model, is $8 million an acre. All of these places to the left are less dense. And they said to me, they're like, well, no, Joe, we're not urban. I said, I never called you urban, I called you dense. You know? This is their choice that they made in their community. So that's the most valuable building in their entire county, the Bank of Beaufort. This gift that was given to them by their grandchildren, or by their grandparents. 4 stories tall, that's it. So just to rub it in, we made an economic MRI, putting Nashville, Austin, and Lawrenceville, the whole counties at the same scale, side by side by side. We ran an economic heart monitor to see how they pulsed out. And we're like, well, check this out. So we've got Nashville's peaking at 192 million an acre, Austin less dense at 476 million an acre, and y'all in Lawrenceville are flatlining at 8. So I asked them, I said, you going broke yet? And they're like, oh yeah, we can't afford our infrastructure. The city and the county, the towns in the county are suing each other and all this stuff. And I'm like, that's wonderful. You've got all of this horizontal infrastructure, you've got none of the wealth to pay for it. So good luck with that. These are the choices that they made by the stories that they told themselves without ever looking at information, without ever checking the data, without ever understanding reality. I'm 6 foot tall and I look like Brad Pitt. Sooner or later, I got to walk by a mirror, right? So how do we get there? How did this happen? Is this stuff too nerdy? Were you guys expecting this in the morning? Or Chattanooga, we did their study. This is their downtown. Across the river, this is their version of Brooklyn over here. This is the hipster zone. Over there, this developer from Atlanta was proposing a single-use Publix grocery store. And he wanted all the urban design guidelines gotten rid of. They were an impediment. He doesn't do that type of development. And the mayor was going to waive them. So we were asked to look at this from a cost-benefit standpoint to see what the exchange was of losing your policy. So here's the site. Around the site, you've got mixed-use buildings already happening. So we're just going to grab comps from the area. You've got Green Life Grocery, which is like a local version of Whole Foods kind of thing. They did an urban grocery store, and you've got townhouses. So we have the ingredients of urbanism in the area. Here's the suburban model. We can pull the values of that. Here's the mixed-use stuff. On the right, we have office above residential, and on the left, or office above retail, and on the left, we have residential above retail. So we just went down the street and grabbed stuff. We didn't come to Boston or go to Chicago to grab things. Here's the local version of the grocery store called Green Life. This is called in the parlance of urbanism, it's called like a deep throat model. It's a liner building glued on the front of a grocery store. So there's a deep hallway that goes through the liner building. Publix has done crazy stuff. This is a Publix in Miami Beach with parking on the roof. 2 layers of parking on the roof with looks like a UFO hit the thing. It's really a conveyor belt to get you to the grocery store. Publix has done a small footprint. This is in West Palm Beach. So they have the typology. We could steal their floor plans. So this is a 2-faced Publix. It's got a surface parking lot and a pedestrian front on the building. Here's the site. 34 foot of grade change. The developer was digging into the site. I don't know if y'all saw this. One of the things that blows my mind as an architect is this. Here's the drawing, and there's a retaining wall going clear through the whole entire drawing. Now it's kind of washed out on this, but you can see in 5-point font, they note that this is a retaining wall going through the whole thing. No one caught that. And we said, that's a pretty big deal. So we turned the model on its side, and we made a really quick Google SketchUp model. This is free software online. It was really easy to use. But we wanted the community to see that all those houses now get to look at a tarmac of a roof, and that there's a 1/4 mile long future graffiti wall sitting there. This is what they're proposing. But what we're also doing is, if you look in the lower right, we're running the taxes. And don't worry about those numbers. I'll come back to that. I just want you to see, when we in the development community do something, we're doing opportunity cost models. We're doing 4 or 5 different scenarios to figure out what's the best one for us. So why, if you're a partner in this, if we're asking you to get rid of something, why don't you see what's in the best interest for you? Do some scenarios, right? So this is scenario 1. This is Urban Design 101. Just for the heck of it, we just stuck some townhouses. So we have housing facing housing, put a couple mixed-use buildings down in the corner, call it a day, right? This is what you get. Do a better site design, learn from the Green Life guy, do a half-liner building, mix up the site a little bit more, make a pedestrian realm around on the streets, parking in the center. This is what you get. You've got 34 foot of grade change. Let's go crazy and do Miami Beach and drive right up on the roof. You don't have to build a ramp, and this is it. Densify the heck out of it. Back it down to West Palm Beach, small footprint, lots of parking, townhouses facing housing. And then let's say you've irritated the developer, he goes back to Atlanta. I do hope this developer isn't in the room, but and you just get what's already happening in the neighborhood organically, which is townhouses and mixed-use buildings, right? So that's another option. So let's recap. The site currently pays $13,000 in taxes as an underdeveloped fallow site. This developer is proposing to bring $45,000 of taxes a year into the community. That's a bump of about 3 times. So yeah, that's a good return, 3 times of new taxes. Well, what's the exchange? What are we getting rid of? This is if you just do Urban Design 101, you're now at $154,000 of taxes. If you do better site design, so for the designers in the audience, this is the value of design, you're now at about $253,000 of taxes. Go crazy, do Miami Beach, which is a little insane, back it down to West Palm Beach in your no-build scenario. So these are your choices. As a community, these are your choices. These are what are on the table and you're being asked to exchange. Let's just grab a couple of them and understand what our choices are. Just taking one against the other, here's what they look like. $44,000 or $45,000 versus $253,000. You can physically see what they look like. Now, to do a true cost-benefit analysis, we need to think like what Chuck talks about and bring time into this. When you decide this, your community is stuck with it for at least 30 years. But we just went ahead and we're conservative. We're just like, let's say the Publix disappears in 20 years. So we're just going to look at the 20-year nut of this decision. These numbers turn to this. We're now at about $600,000 of gain of new opportunity over 20 years versus $5 million. Y'all got quiet. I mean, is this too much? Am I going like way overboard on this? I mean, this is, if you just put $2 million into this project, you would still be ahead of the game by $2.2 million over what this developer's offering you. So there's like a death by 1,000 cuts on how our development pattern undermines our system of government. So when we accept that pattern, we're essentially saying, okay, we don't need the Greenway, we don't need an art teacher, and let's just get rid of that dancing traffic cop. Y'all got a dancing traffic cop, right? You know, this pattern of development undermines our ability to pay for a basic level of government. So I'm going to close with an example. Chuck and I, we teamed up with Lafayette, Louisiana. Louisiana's going broke, their mayor knows it, and he asked us to do a full net model. How do you see the cost benefit of the whole community? Now incidentally, Lafayette's knows the thing that was surprising to us is that Lafayette went broke once before in 1994. So in 1994, and I'm seriously not making this up, people in Lafayette are awesome. This is the cover of the budget document for the parish, the county, for their annual report in 1994. I love this. Like, this is the Lafayette Parish government about to get like swamped by this wave and then a shark's gonna eat it. Like, the finance officer was sending a signal. She's like, hey, we're going broke. Now, what do you think the commission did, the parish council? They basically kicked that can down the road. We're not gonna make that difficult decision. So undeterred, the finance officer was like, hey, did I mention how screwed we are? And so their resolution, because the city had to step up, because the city's also part of the county. The city's like, okay, we'll help you out. So the city essentially bailed the county out. They did a joint city-county government, and we asked them, we're like, so what did you guys do? Did you just fire the artists from the first 2 years and get clip art? Like, what did you do? You didn't change your pattern. You know, if we look at the development pattern of how if I were a developer building this godforsaken place somewhere in Arizona, I have hard costs and soft costs. I put my profit on top of it, divide it by the rooftops, put it out in the community. That's how I make my project work. When you guys get this stuck onto your streets, do you send out your CFO to figure out all of your service costs, all of the costs for that pattern to be out there, all of the costs of all the infrastructure you've already committed to make that happen? And do you send them a bill for that cost? The short answer is no. You tax people on value. So there's actually a perverse incentive for me to build junk in your community. That's the way our system works. Now, I'm not the first person to question it. It actually goes back to this guy. The Nixon administration in 1974 published the cost of sprawl document in 1974. The first gas crisis, our federal government was trying to get us to understand our local land use patterns. So we did their model in Lafayette. Take a guess where downtown is. And then there's some new urbanism stuff popping up over here. So the density actually begets wealth. But just taking one little piece, the pavement, and just seeing what it is, they've got their road network, right? Taking all the roads and combining it together, this municipality, which is about the same size as Savannah, is managing 6.5 square miles of parking, of roads. So we just made it into a really big asphalt parking lot and floated it over Manhattan to show them how big it is. Basically, it would span from Long Island to Manhattan and hit New Jersey. They've filled New York Harbor with a parking lot that they need to replace every 30 years, 35 years. This is floating it over New Orleans. It's about 12 times the French Quarter. And we said, you own this. You have to fix it. So 16% of it are in these things. We call them publicly funded, privately used driveways. They're not part of the network. I mean, this guy's even using it as his park his trailer on it. You know, it's a driveway. Why is the community paying for this? So looking at the system, in gray you have the city, in yellow you have the county, you have a joint system of government. There's a lot more roads inside the city because it's a finer grid of infrastructure. Yet from a financial standpoint, the county out there has a third of the roads, but they're only paying 7% of the bill. This was a bit of a problem to put out in the community because we basically asked the question, why don't these pie charts match up? Now, one of the commissioners, who was actually a fiscally prudent commissioner, flipped on us. And this is actually his campaign ad that he sent to the newspaper on his platform. And I love this. It's not about where you live, it's about what you believe. Right, so we've moved from fact to fantasy. The Public Works Director responded to this, and again, people in Lafayette have an incredible sense of humor. The Public Works Director responded by saying this: there's no such thing as an infrastructure ferry. So we had to Photoshop Kevin into that. And so we made a simple picture. We're like, okay, in red is the debt, the obligated debt of your roads, and blue is your revenue stream. Is the blue bigger than the red? Now, hold on, before you answer that, let me make it simpler for you. In red is your obligated debt, and in blue is your revenue. Can the blue pay for the red? Now, before you answer that, hold on a minute. Realize that half that blue is already committed to the debt service of the red. So let me ask you a question. Y'all win a popularity contest. You're managing a multi-billion-dollar real estate development company called Lafayette. Can you answer this question? This is the reality of how the system operates. Now, we took the cost of all the properties. This is a side view of their model. And we sent everybody a bill for where they live, and in green is the taxes they paid. Now, it's a really simple cost-benefit analysis. What do you cost and what are you paying in revenue? Net one against the other, what's in the black and what's in the red, and then here's the whole entire parish in 3D. So we said to them, like, that's the reality of your cash flow. This is your net model of your economics writ large, and it looks like your parish is bleeding. If you drop this whole thing on the floor and just let everything pop up, you can start to see where the costs are. And most of it's tied to, they're in a bayou, they have to drain a lot of stormwater. And so the stormwater costs, incidentally, their MPO plan, in the lower right here, or the lower part of the model, right there, is mostly expensive because it's super deep into the bayou. Yet the MPO is projecting all of this future growth into this area that's already underground financially. So just to kind of close on this, they had 5 feet of pipe in 1951 per person and 2.4 fire hydrants per 1,000. They've grown their community to 121,000 people, yet they've grown their infrastructure to 50 feet of pipe per person and 51 fire hydrants per 1,000. So though they've grown their population by 350%, they've grown their liability by 1,000 and 2,000%. They told me, they're like, well, Joe, look, we got rich, right? I mean, they got oil money, right, Chuck? And so we're like, okay, yeah, here's your adjusted for today. Here's your value of your median household income back then, and here's where you've grown it to. So you've grown your population, you've grown your wealth by, let's give you 200%. You've grown your obligation by 1,000 and 2,000%. So they have a really big problem here. The average house is worth $150,000, which is $1,500 in taxes. Of that, which actually matriculates down to the roads, is $150 to the roads. Yet when you pencil out the roads, what that house owes the road system in maintenance reserve to fix that road is this. Now there's stuff under the roads, right? That stuff costs $4,000 a year. Do you see the financial problem yet? The average house is upside down $7,000 a pop. Now we'd be Pollyannas to say, just go ahead and raise taxes. That's just not going to work. But you need to acknowledge the fact that the system we think works is not working and we can't afford it. I want to be 6 foot tall. I think you all should pay for it, right? So we've bought stuff and we now have the pipers come due. I'm just going to flip forward on something here and close with you all. There's policies that are out there that drive all of this. and they can hurt you. You can put the gun down. You're probably wondering about Savannah. So Kevin had sent us a couple of addresses, and we just did a quick poke into them. Here's your Walmart at $252,000 an acre of value, and your Target's more than that at let's say 340. Did y'all follow me? This is the Harris Barbershop at $500,000 of value per acre. This little building is producing more taxes at a productivity level than the Target and almost double the Walmart out of that. This is Choose's Market. Now we're up to $700,000. Is that 3 times the Walmart's productivity in property tax production? The Ron Thai, not exactly anything to write home about architecturally, but it's 3.3 million an acre of value. Is that 10 times the Walmart's production? Choose 22, about 3 million an acre. Lady and Sons, we didn't really know who the lady was. We found out last night. 22 million an acre out of that thing. It's a 3-story building, then Columbia Place at 18 million. So to look at basically 2 acres of the Ron Thai place would equal the 29-acre Walmart. Can y'all pull off 2 more acres of that stuff? 0.5 acres of Lady and Sons, a 3-story building, would equal the 48-acre Walmart plus the Sam's Club. If you look at land as a limited resource, you should be asking yourself this question: how much of this resource do we want to burn through? So putting them all side by side, this is how your county looks. On the left is the Walmart, Sam's Club combined, then the Walmart, then the Target, then this is the Harris Barbershop, this is Choose's, this is Shoes, this is Ron, and then here's Columbia Condos, and then this is Lady and Sons. And that's who you are. That's some of your data. I'm going to turn it back over to Chuck. And if you're not measuring this stuff, you can't manage it. Put the data out there, understand it. My city is worth more than the Atlanta Falcons. We're about 13 of them. I can guarantee you the owner of the Atlanta Falcons knows Matt Ryan's towel bill. If they know this stuff, you should know your data as well. Thank you.
How's everybody doing? This is interesting, isn't it? I love having these conversations because this is stuff that Joe and I, we were here last night and spent hours walking around and we obsessed over this stuff. And it's fun to share with people, especially when you're getting it for the first time and see everybody's faces, and this stuff really matters a lot. And we travel around the country and we meet with different communities and chat with different people, and the reaction is often, it's almost always the same. It's like, wow, why? This is so obvious. Why aren't we doing this? And if you're having that reaction, that's the right reaction, right? We're going to talk a little bit about transportation to finish up here in the morning. Everybody here is familiar with the debate we're having on transportation, right? We have all these needs, all these things we want to do. We have to make repairs. We have to make improvements for safety reasons. We have to fight congestion. We have all these things we want to do, and we just don't have the money. We have all these demands in our system. We have these 2 generations of people, the boomers and the millennials, and they want different things from our transportation system than they wanted a decade ago, and we just don't have the money to do all those things. We have all these new improvements that we want to make, all these additional things that we want to do. Yeah, I'm not sure what you're, there we go. We want to make investments in rail and bus transit. We want to build bike lanes. We want to make pedestrian improvements. We just don't have the money to do it all. What is the obvious answer to these problems? We need more money, right? If we just had more money, if we just could get more revenue, we could do all these things that we want to do. And if you listen to the transportation debate at every level of government, everywhere in the country, from red states to blue states, everything in between, it is about how do we get more money to continue doing the things we're doing today. The American Society of Civil Engineers, kind of the go-to organization for transportation spending, put out a report a couple years ago, that said we have a $94 billion a year gap in basic maintenance. This is not building everything we ever dreamed of doing. This is just maintaining and keeping the stuff that we have. Today, we fund transportation largely by the gas tax. The current gas tax is 18.4 cents a gallon. There's a conversation going on that we should index this to inflation. This is a federal gas tax. We should index this to inflation because it's lost a lot of purchasing power since it was last raised in 1993. If we were to do that, bring it up to today's same purchasing power, it would be around 30 cents a gallon. We said, okay, what if instead of indexing it to inflation, we indexed it to GDP growth? Transportation is investments in growth, so what if the economy grew as fast as our rate of taxation? That would be, again, around 30 cents a gallon. What if we grew our gas tax at the same rate that traffic grew? So we indexed it to actual demand. That would be around 24 cents a gallon. Here's what we would actually need if we were going to meet that $94 billion deficit. We would need a gas tax of about 78 cents a gallon. That's not going to happen, right? It's not going to happen. The American Society of Civil Engineers put out a report that said if we fail to make the proper investments in our transportation systems, families and businesses are going to experience losses. Those losses between 2012 and 2020 will total $1 trillion. Most of this is time spent stuck in traffic, extra wear and tear in your car. In order to avoid that $1 trillion loss, the American Society of Civil Engineers says between 2012 and 2020, we need to spend $2.2 trillion. That's real hard cash, right? That sounds really crazy, right? It gets crazier. Between 2012 and 2040, in order to avoid a loss of federal budget, if we don't make the proper investments in our transportation system, we would have the GDP grow less than it otherwise would. And that would result in the federal government losing $540 billion of tax revenue. So if we don't properly invest in transportation, we're not going to have a big as economy, and we're going to lose out on revenue. In order to avoid that loss, we need to spend $6.6 trillion. These numbers don't make any sense, do they? And you would be right to look at me and say, Chuck, you got something wrong here. This is crazy. There's no organization that would put out a report like this. Well, they didn't write it like this, right? When you write a propaganda report, you say, all these horrible things will happen, and you say over the next 10 years, it's $1 trillion, and over the next 40 years, it's $5 trillion. And all you have to do to avoid that is just spend this little, relatively little amount each year. Well, when you take the relatively little amount and multiply it by the number of years, this is what you get. Apparently the Wall Street Journal has no reporter capable of using a calculator and basic multiplication. Because we pointed this out to them, they're like, oh, wow, okay. This sounds crazy, though, but I want to show you the kind of projects that we're building. I was in California last week. Here's Highway 91 in California, one of the most congested freeways in the entire country. We are now in the process of spending $1.4 billion to add a couple extra lanes onto this highway. Here's how it was reported in the local paper. The project will give some relief to drivers in the regular lanes, raising their average rush hour speeds from 8 miles per hour to 9.4 miles per hour. There's nobody's life who's made any better because they can commute now at 9.4 miles per hour. Yet, when we do our economic equations to determine what a good project is, here's exactly how we do them. We say there's 150,000 cars a day on this road. They'll all save an average of 30 seconds a day on their commute. 30 seconds times 150,000 times 365 days a year times 50 years that we think this highway will be there times $28 an hour, which is the average salary and benefits that a California commuter can expect. And this $1.4 billion project will make the state of California something like $14 billion. That's insane math. That's crazy stuff. Yet those are the equations that we're using to justify spending enormous sums of money on things that don't make a difference at all. Do we really need more money? Or do we have to ask a different, more sophisticated question? If we acknowledge that we're not going to raise the gas tax to 78 cents a gallon just to maintain what we have, let alone do all this other stuff that we want to do, we need a different question, right? If we don't have the money, what then? If we don't have the money, what do we do differently? What I want to do today is walk you through some of the base assumptions behind our transportation system so we can start to ask the question, what would we do differently if we're committed to if we recognize and understand that we're not going to have the money to continue on? The first thing I want to help you look at is our notion of the hierarchical road network. This is kind of the base assumption by which we build. This is why they built the highway through the middle of your city. This is why, you're looking at some crazy projects in this area. The hierarchical road system. The idea here is that small roads flow into larger roads, flow into larger roads. You go from the dead-end cul-de-sac local street to the collector to the arterial, and there's a natural progression up. If you go to any city in the country that has a transportation plan, they will have a map showing their hierarchical road network. I want you to step back for a second and ponder a river system. And I'm going to use Midwestern terms, so I'm sorry if these aren't the terms you use, but I think you know what I'm talking about here. In a system like this, you go from small creeks and brooks into smaller rivers empty into larger rivers empty into major tributaries. We get these systems, right? And when we have rain out on the edge, if the rain is large enough or persistent enough, what happens? We intuitively understand that we get flooding at that major tributary, right? In fact, we get this so much that what have we done? We actually, as a matter of policy, have gone out to the edge and said, look, this flooding is really devastating. It costs us a ton of money. It economically is really difficult. It's traumatic. What we're going to do is we're going to require you to do little things like retain your own water on site. You can't fill your wetlands. You can't just run that water right into the ditch and have it flow in. We know that the cumulative effects of this is overwhelming. Think of a river of a different type. Not a river of water, but a river of concrete and asphalt. And imagine that we have rain out on the periphery. Why are we shocked when we get a flood? Why are we overwhelmed? Why are we just surprised when the result of our system is flooding? And while, yes, we get a little bit of financial benefit from the stuff we get out on the edge, the costs of this flooding are absolutely astounding. If we set out to design a system to manufacture congestion, this is what it would look like. If we said our objective was to create the most congested system possible, we would say, well, let's take everybody out on the road, funnel them into one place at the same time every day. Every city in this country has a rush hour. My little town of 13,000 people has a rush hour. If you ask the people there, they will tell you we deal with unbearable congestion, right? For 5 minutes, right? Why would they say that? Because we take everybody possible and we put them in the same place at the same time every day, on the way in and on the way out. We have built a system that manufactures congestion. Because of this, and because congestion is so devastating to the way we've set up our transportation systems, it makes us as engineers incredibly fearful of congestion. We have a tendency to overestimate the amount of traffic that we anticipate. These are estimates from a Washington State project that were done in successive years. You can see the engineers estimating that traffic was going to climb incredibly. It actually declined. We see the same thing on a national level where engineers over and over again are anticipating the monster of congestion to rear its ugly head, yet traffic counts continue to go down. What this means is that we habitually overbuild. We habitually overbuild. And if you think about it, you're not really aware of the overbuilding. It's so subtle for you, the user. Because for you, the user, what is the downside to a roadway with no congestion? What do you experience? You don't even notice it because you just have free flow, right? You don't notice all the extra capacity. But what is the downside for you if we're just slightly under what we need for capacity at free flow, right? Horrible congestion. And so we're very, very sensitive to not having enough capacity, but we're completely blind to overcapacity. We don't even bother to consider it. So if you were to go out at rush hour in any city and float up at 10,000 feet and look down at the pavement that's been put in, you would see a tiny little bit of it have congestion, but the vast majority of what we built would have no cars on it at all. It is really hard to call a system optimized and efficient when during your peak period of time, 90% of what you built is not being used. It would be as if the airlines sized their fleet for the demand that they expected at Thanksgiving and Christmas and then ran empty airplanes the rest of the year. We would find that to be insane. Yet from a transportation standpoint, that is exactly what we have built with our systems. I want to talk a little bit, because I think it's important for this city, I want to talk a little bit about the concept of forgiving design. Forgiving design is a brilliant notion that has saved hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives. When we first started building highways in this country, we went out and we took the old wagon trails and what have you, and we converted them into high-performance roadways. When you were putting in a wagon trail and you came up to that big tree, what did you do? You just went around it, right? It was not a big... When you came up to that wetland or that big rock or whatever it was, you just went around it. That was not a big deal. Now go out and take that path and put a high-performance surface on it and a high-performance vehicle on that surface. What happens? You would get to those corners and people would go off and hit things. And people died. What we saw in the early days of the automobile were amazingly high rates of fatalities. We had really, really high rates. And so engineers are very smart people, engineers looked at this problem and they said, this is not necessarily a matter of design, it's a matter of how our users are using this system. And so what we can do as engineers is we can study the way people use this system, and we can adapt our design to compensate, to forgive the common mistakes that people make. So we will design to forgive their mistakes. So how do we do that? We take a standard roadway, 2-lane, and we say, we know that sometimes people will drift a little bit. They'll get distracted. They're not paying full attention. They'll look down to switch the music on their iPod or what have you. They'll drift a little bit. So what we want to do is we want to forgive that so we don't have any type of collision. So we'll widen out the lanes a little bit. We'll make it easier so if they drift, they're not going to hit somebody. Then we know that sometimes vehicles actually kind of drift off the side a little bit, or they lose control, or for some reason they swerve. And so what we want to do is give them a little bit of recovery room so they don't go off the roadway. They can, maintain control and get back into the normal travel lane. Then we also know that sometimes vehicles do leave the road. There are various reasons where they do exit the roadway. And what we want to have happen is we don't want to have them hit something with all that kinetic energy. We want to have that energy kind of dissipated before they would run into something. So what do? We get rid of the obstacles on the edge. And now we have a roadway design with forgiving design principles. This is brilliant. And this has saved countless numbers of lives. And when you go across this country and you see what we have built, it is absolutely amazing. What's the problem with this? The problem is this: when we take this kind of notion, this kind of theory, and we bring it into our cities. When we take this notion, these principles, and we bring them into the cities, we are misapplying them. Because what are we doing to drivers in this type of situation? We're signaling to them that we built in all kinds of buffer for them. We're signaling to them that this is a very safe place for them to go very fast. And so speeds go up, and we get tragedy. When you mix high speed with complexity, you get tragedy. We have a saying at Strong Towns: if you need a sign to tell people to slow down, you designed your street wrong. A safe street in an urban area, a safe street is one where the driver feels uncomfortable when they're driving at speeds that are not safe for everyone. We walked around your core of your city last night. It's amazing. Block after block after block that just is stunning. Yet we would every now and then hit this place where even at 9:30 at night, the cars would be coming through, and they'd be coming through at speeds that just were uncomfortable, just not safe. Not safe for the people on the street, not safe for the driver. We've applied forgiving design principles in the wrong place. In the wrong place. When you go to engineering manuals, they will quite often have a chart like this. A chart like this that shows essentially the hierarchical road network in engineering language, right? This is how we speak to each other. So what you see here is arterials, collectors, and locals. And if you want an arterial, arterials are all about mobility, so all about getting places, but not about access, not about being in a place. If you go to the way end of the spectrum and you want to create a place, be in a place, have lots of access, you're not going to have much mobility. Those are actually local streets. But then as engineers, we have the have your cake and eat it too kind of thing in the middle, this nice sweeping curve that shows you can have access and mobility at the same time. We call that a collector, right? When we go through your city, you have like tons of collectors, right? It's the default way they build. From a financial standpoint, what we find is that we can build arterials and we can build locals. We can build connections between places, and we can build places in ways that are financially really, really successful. What we can't do is build both. We can't do this hybrid approach where we have fast-moving traffic and complexity. We get those really low value return on investments like Joe showed us earlier. Incidentally, we can also build these to be really, really safe. If you're moving at high speeds between one place and another, there's not a lot of complexity. These are incredibly safe environments. We've used forgiving design principles and figured that out. When you're on a local street, when you're in a place and speeds are really, really low, what you find is that the margin of error is really great and we don't get a lot of fatalities. We don't get a lot of tragedy. It's this middle area here, when you're driving somewhere between 30 miles an hour and 50 miles an hour, where you have all the complexity that we see, the high levels of fatalities. What we have done is taken that chart and flipped it on its side and said, where do we find the most value? Where do we find the greatest value? So what you're seeing here in the vertical is value and horizontal is speed. We find the most value when we have really low speeds, environments that we call streets, and we have really high value when we have roads, high speeds. Where we don't have value is this middle area in between, something that we call a strode. A strode is a street road hybrid. We call this the futon of transportation. If you think of a futon as being an uncomfortable couch that makes into an uncomfortable bed, a strode is an investment that's trying to do two things at once and does neither of them well, right? It tries to be both street and road. What's the difference? A road is a high-speed connection between two places. If you think of a road today as a replacement of the railroad was a road on rails. In a railroad, you got on at one spot, you got off on another spot. There's a high-speed connection between the two. There aren't frontage railroads, there aren't drive-through railroads. It's just a high-speed connection. If you look at this photo, we have built in this strode everything that you would need for high-speed travel, right? We have 4 wide highway-scale lanes. We've got a center turn lane to get that turning traffic out of the way so the through traffic can speed right on through. Does anyone get to go fast in this strode? No. Why? Because we have low speed limits, We put in traffic signals that make you stop and go zero. So even though we've made this massive investment to move cars very quickly, no cars get to move very quickly. What is a street? A street is, and always has been, a platform for building wealth. A platform for building wealth. When we look at this, we see all the elements that the cities try to put in to make this a wealth-producing street, right? We have wide sidewalks, we have banners and decorative lights and benches and things we put out to try to make this a nicer place. Is this a wealth-producing street? No. Why? Because everybody knows if you're shopping on one side of the street and you're going to go shop on the other side of the street, nobody walks down to that light and waits and then goes, right? Nobody crosses 7 lanes of Strode with the cars going by. What do? They get in their car, they whip a U-turn around, and they go in. And so all these buildings are oriented towards automobiles. They have large parking lots, they have drive-throughs, they have all the things that in Joe's presentation pencil out as being really low returning investments. These Strodes do not create wealth. If we're going to have a conversation about how we do more with what we have, if we don't have enough money, how do we think differently? We have to have an active strategy to get rid of our Strodes. We have to convert our Strodes into wealth-creating streets and high-performance roadways. From an engineering standpoint, this is a very easy thing to do. From a cultural, political standpoint, it's much more difficult. I'm going to give you the easy kind of version on how to do this, understanding that technically this is very easy to do. I will acknowledge that culturally, politically, it is much more difficult. Let that linger with you for a minute. We don't have the money. We have to think differently. The problem here is not engineering, it's cultural, political, right? If we want to go from a Strode to a street, we want to go from a Strode, a dangerous, low-performing, expensive piece of infrastructure, to a wealth-creating street. What do? We slow the traffic. We bring everything down to a neighborhood speed. We prioritize pedestrians, bikers, and transit over automobiles. Automobiles become the lowest of those 3, right? They wait while everyone else goes through. We intensify our adjacent land use pattern. There's no way to build wealth without actually building wealth. And so the idea here is that we have a relationship between transportation and land use. We're actually making investments to make things more valuable here. And then we embrace the complexity inherent with a great street. If we want to make our Strodes into roads, we go the other direction, right? We limit access because we're trying to speed up traffic. We're trying to allow you to get from one place to another more quickly. We segregate automobiles from other modes. I'm sorry to the bike and walk advocates who insist on having sidewalks right next to 55-mile-an-hour roads. There is no way to make a safe place where you have cars traveling at above 30 miles an hour, feet away from people outside of cars. It's not possible. And so if we want people there, they have to be separate, they have to be segregated from each other. They have to be separate. We don't allow the adjacent land use to degrade our capacity. We don't put in those interchanges, those frontage roads, all the accesses, because what that represents is a short-term mining of this massive public investment we've made to move people from one wealthy place to another wealth-creating place. And then we simplify. Roads are really simple to understand, and we often overthink them. If we just go back to basics, we can get how they work, right? We've got one productive place and another productive place, places that are successful, and we connect them with a roadway. When places become more successful, right, what do? Well, we have more capacity, we have more demand, we can add more lanes. We can actually, build more capacity. What if we can't build more capacity? Well, when we have one productive place we're connecting with another productive place, all of a sudden transit becomes a really viable solution, right? You have a place people want to be and another place people want to be, voila, they'll pay to go back and forth, right? When that becomes overcrowded, we can improve our modes. A real road system that we're not trying to mine for short-term economic gain, we can build and operate really cost effectively and move a whole lot of people and goods between 2 productive places. We get how to do this. We're actually really good at this. And if we dealt with the social, cultural, political aspect of it, we actually, from an engineering standpoint, get this really well. What don't we get? We don't get this. We don't get the street part. If there's one takeaway from this presentation today, I want it to be this slide right here. Building a productive place is more art than science. Building a successful street is more of an art than a science. We, as engineers, as planners, like to think that everything can be reduced to a cookbook. That we can go to a design manual and open it up and say, okay, we're in this type of an environment, we have this type of traffic flow, here's what the cookbook says to do. But great places are not built that way. Great places are built slowly, incrementally, chaotically, with a little bit of churn to them. They have all kinds of different things going on, not just the design of the street, the design of the sidewalks, the zoning and the land use and the buildings, but what do they have? They have people, right? People with dreams and aspirations, people who hold on to properties for unreasonable amounts of time, people who ask too much money for a property, people who fall in love and who start businesses and who have kids and do all kinds of chaotic, crazy things. None of that comes out of a cookbook. None of that comes out of a cookbook. It can only be slowly nurtured over time. When we look at the places, the way we built places before this great experiment, we see that kind of an approach. This is my hometown in 1870. 30 years later, this street would become this, right? But this is how it started. This little set of pop-up shacks. Savannah started like this, right? Charleston started like this. Asheville started like this. Every single city that was ever built prior to our new experimental way of building started like this, little hopes and dreams, right? And a lot of them failed. A lot of them didn't work out. When they didn't work out, we didn't have bailout of Wall Street banks and, the stock market dropping 20% and people freaking out. What happened? A few people lost some money. They salvaged what they could, they move on to the next place. But a lot of these places were successful, and when they were successful, they would grow incrementally. They'd grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and become incrementally more intense. So after 30 years of incremental development, these little hopes and dreams would turn into that block I showed you earlier. This is the same exact street. And after another 40 years of incrementally growing up, incrementally growing out, and becoming incrementally more intense, a successful place like this, these 2- and 3-story wood buildings would be converted into buildings of brick and granite. This is the same street. This is the way we build wealth. We build it slowly and incrementally over time. We don't build it by going to the casino, putting it all on red, making huge bets and huge gambles, right? We build it slowly over a broad area, over a long period of time. I want to show you how potent this is. Joe has shown you in a macro sense what I'm going to now show you in a lot-by-lot basis. These are 2 identical blocks in my hometown. The one on the left I've labeled old and blighted. The one on the right I've labeled shiny and new. If you look at them, they're the same size area, the same amount of public infrastructure. They have about the same thoroughfare, the same neighborhood. Everything about them is the same except for the style of development on them. That old and blighted block looks like this. In the 1920s, as my city was growing incrementally, the next increment of out were these 3 blocks. And so what you are looking at here is the cheapest commercial building that you could build in the 1920s, way out on the edge of town. And had things continued as they had for thousands of years, what would have happened to these places? As this city became more successful, you would have had redevelopment here. They would have either been torn down and rebuilt, or there would have been 2nd and 3rd stories added on. And you would have seen these places grow incrementally up and become incrementally more intense as incremental development was happening out on the edge. That's not what happened though, right? After these were built, we had the Depression, we had World War II, and then we had a completely different style of development that just skipped right over this and started building the mall, the big developments, all the stuff out on the edge, right? This block has stagnated for 90 years. 2 blocks over used to look just like this. The city went in, labeled it blight, got it torn down, and now we have the new taco drive-thru. Everybody was thrilled about this, right? This got rid of blight. Now we have a shiny, nice new building. It meets all the zoning codes, all the setbacks, the floor area ratios, the sign ordinance, the parking requirements. They're all met here. Plenty of parking, right? The city engineer was happy because we got rid of the on-street parking. Now the cars can move more freely through there, improve traffic flow. The environmental people were happy because now we have some green space and they actually got native plants in the stormwater retention area. Even the bike and ped people were happy because they got a sidewalk in there. The sidewalk ends right there. It actually ends just off camera there. But they were happy, right? Because they got something. Here's what nobody bothered to look at. That old and blighted block, that rundown, junky place, has a total value of $1.1 million. That same size area, same amount of public infrastructure, just a different style development 2 blocks over, brand new, has a value of only $800,000. There's actually 42% more wealth in that old, junky, rundown block. Understand what you're looking at. You're looking at the traditional development pattern, the way we built places incrementally, slowly, chaotically over thousands and thousands of years. You're looking at that in its infancy, after 90 years of neglect, and it still outperforms by a wide margin the stuff we build brand new today. And we all know the trajectory of the taco joint, right? We've all been around long enough to see that 20 years from now, that taco joint will be a used car lot. 10 years later, it will be boarded up. They'll be selling drugs out the back, and we'll be trying to get a grant to get it torn down, right? We've all seen this. We've all been around long enough. In fact, in the years subsequent to this being done, here's what's actually happened to the property values. Now look for a sec. I just want to pause here. Look for a sec at those buildings. Who's running a business in those old and blighted buildings? What are those businesses? They're marginal places, right? You got a pawn shop, you've got a liquor store, got one of those old-timey barbers where you can get the flat top, right? Who are these people, though? I actually went out and talked to all of them. And I asked them questions like, where do you bank? Where do you get your insurance? Where do you advertise? Who do you hire for things that you need? And you know what they did, right? It's all right around. When we're building wealth in a block like that, it's wealth amongst us, right? It's wealth here. These are largely, kind of the low disadvantaged businesses. Yet, a lot of them own their building. They actually own wealth. They actually have something that they can pass on to someone else for all their hard work. I went to the taco place. Where do you guys do your advertising? Oh, we got a corporate headquarters in Wyoming. They do that for us. Where do you bank? Oh, well, we have a corporate bank. Where do you do all these things? None of them were from our community. None of them. There's a big difference between the impacts of one of these and the impacts of the other. We see the same thing out on the edge. This is our Mills Fleet Farm complex. This is our 19-acre big box store out on the edge of town. This is the most valuable piece of property in the entire Brainerd Lakes area. When these guys show up for a meeting, we just stop the meeting and ask them, what can we do for you, right? This is a double-sized big box store, auto dealership, gas station, 19 acres. Here's 19 acres of our downtown. Now, if you've seen the movie Fargo, you've seen a not so flattering but not so inaccurate portrayal of my downtown. Not a very nice place. Most of the buildings are unoccupied on the second, third stories. We've had a lot of them burned down in my lifetime. Nothing new has ever been built in my lifetime in downtown Brainerd. Wait for a fire, clean up the wreckage, make it a parking lot, right? 19 acres. That 19 acres out on the edge of town, $0.6 million an acre. That 19 acres in the downtown, 78% more. The city's actually collecting 78% more property tax, about the same retail tax from that regional big box, from that rundown 19 acres downtown than they are from that regional drawing big box store out on the edge. That slow, incremental, messy pattern of development is incredibly potent financially. What happens when Mills Fleet Farm closes? At some point it will happen, right? At some point that will not be a viable use on that. It might take a decade, it might take 50 years. We don't have the Hudson Bay Company anymore, right? At some point this will be something else. What comes next? Well, we've all seen that too, right? We all know that these buildings, this is the highest and best use. There's nothing that comes next that's going to be anywhere near this. There's 134 different properties in that 19 acres downtown. What happens next on those? What happens when one of those loses a tenant or someone goes out of business? Or as a planner, we figure out that we don't have infinite wisdom and there's not enough residential property, there's too much office space, or there's too much office space, not enough residential, right? These are highly adaptable buildings. There's a reason why people built this way for thousands of years around the world. It's incredibly resilient, incredibly productive, and highly adaptable. When we step back and we look at these places, we see one variable time and time again. When we look, Joe and I, and we go to these places that are financially successful, and we step back and we say, what is the variable here that is showing us success? What is the thing that we see time and time again? There is one thing that jumps out as in every one of these places. What is it? What is it? People. It's people. People are the indicator species of success. People are the indicator species of success. When you see people out walking around doing things, that messy, chaotic process, you're getting it right. You're doing it right. If you're going to your design manual and you're figuring out, like, here's how we do this, and you go out and you do it, and then people don't show up, you did it wrong. You did it wrong. Go back and reiterate. Do it again. Try something else. People are the indicator species of success. When engineers go out and build streets, they go to that cookbook. And they try to do it based on, this is the way it's always been done. This is our industry practice, our industry norms, right? An engineer going out to design a street will say, what's the speed that we're supposed to design for? They'll then say, what's the volume of traffic that I'm expected to handle? Given that speed and that volume, what does the cookbook say is a safe design? And then how much is that going to cost? Those are the values that an engineer brings to a project. I'm an engineer. I did this for years. These are the values that we bring to design of a place. I want to ask you what your values are. I want to ask you, if you were going out to build a place like this, what would be the values you would apply? And I'm going to actually ask you to yell it out to me. Would you say, I want to make sure traffic flows at high speeds. I want to make sure that we have a high volume of traffic we're able to handle. I want to make sure the environment is safe, or I want to make sure that our investments are cost effective. What would be most important to you? Is it speed, volume, safety, or cost? Let's do that again. Speed, volume, safety, or cost? Think about these places again. Think about the places where you live and work and go to eat and recreate, and the places you bring people when they come visit you here in Savannah. If you were to look at those places, is it more important to you that you move cars at speed, that you move a high volume of traffic, or that your investments be cost effective? Is it speed, volume, or cost that's most important to you? If you had to prioritize between speed and volume, you want to move cars at speed or you want to move a high volume of cars, which would you pick? Would it be speed or volume? Do you see what we did here? These are your values. Do you see how they relate to the way we build now? It's the inverse, right? If we're actually going to build places where people show up, that indicator species, we have to build to our values. We have to build to the values that we know. We shouldn't be ashamed of this, right? We show up at our meetings and the engineers come in with the books and they say, well, here's how we have to design this. Here's how it's got to be built. Here's what the manual says. But the manual doesn't reflect our values. In a really successful place, what we see is that safety for everyone is the most important thing. And that speed, actually moving cars quickly, is the lowest priority that everybody has. It's the lowest priority. We should not be ashamed to project those values. Now I want to end by talking a little bit about complete streets. Do people know what complete streets are? Complete streets is, it's funny because I was actually doing engineering work when complete streets kind of started to come about, and the engineers hated it at first. Like, you mean we got to design for bikes and you know, pedestrians too? They didn't like it, but then they figured out that we could get paid more money by doing it. I call this, I like to call complete streets it's a very American approach. It's separate but equal. It kind of fits with our mentality of how we should design things. So bikes get their place. People, you know, walking get their place. Transit gets their place. Everybody gets their own place, and we're very comfortable with that because nobody has to give up anything. It doesn't make us have to deal with messiness or complexity. We can just throw our money and our affluence at a problem and try to deal with it that way. I get this. Because if you are a pedestrian advocate or a bike advocate and you go out in most of America today, it's a despotic world for you. If you don't own a car, America is a despotic country for you. If you are a poor person, it is incredibly difficult to live in this country. Try walking around in places. You all get a little spoiled here because parts of your city are so beautiful to walk in, but go walk in other parts, right? Go to other cities that are not laid out this way. This is a despotic world. I get this. I get that this is our answer, right? I want to temper the enthusiasm for complete streets with an insight relating to strong towns. Complete streets accommodate pedestrians within an auto-dominated environment. Truly great places, truly productive streets accommodate automobiles within an environment dominated by people. People are the indicator species of success. And when we build places for humans that are scaled to them, what we see is not only do we create places that provide room for everybody, people at different price points, people at different levels of affluence, people wanting to bootstrap and start small businesses. We provide so much opportunity when we build slow, incrementally, chaotic, over a broad area, over a long period of time. But we also build a ton of wealth in our communities. This is the way we make places successful. Successful in aggregate for our local government, successful in the micro for our individuals and our families. E.F. Schumacher said, any intelligent fool can make things more complex, bigger, more complex, and more violent. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the other direction. I know there's that touch of genius here. I see it, right? Like, I'm in this community, I see this stuff is genius. All you really need is the courage to reflect your values, to stand up and say, we want to do things a little bit differently. Thank you so much. We've got, while Kevin's coming up here, I will just say, I told you guys I would give you our website at the end, strongtowns.org. is it. If you go to that dash chat, you can fill out a thing, and I'll actually send you the slides from the presentation today. But if you just go to strongtowns.org, we do media stuff every single day. This week we're doing a whole campaign on housing issues. And if you're interested in learning more about the finances of your cities, how they work, and how that relates to how we live prosperous lives, 7 days a week, the podcasts, videos, and lots of other media. So thank you so much.